पृथिवी शान्तिरन्तरिक्षगं शान्तिर् द्यौः शान्तिर् दिशः शान्तिरवान्तर दिशा शान्तिरग्निः शान्तिर्वायुः शान्तिरादित्यः शान्तिश्चन्द्रमा शान्तिर्नक्षत्राणि शान्तिरापः शान्तिरोषधयः शान्तिर्वनस्पतयः शान्तिर्गौ शान्तिरजा शान्तिरश्वः शान्तिः पुरुषः शान्तिर्ब्रह्म शान्तिर्ब्राह्मणः शान्तिः शान्तिरेव शान्तिः शान्तिर्मे अस्तु शान्तिः. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas satbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmaheti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. Peace, peace, peace. So happy Happy Father's Day to all. It's interesting that the order in which we celebrate these days is exactly the order we find in one of the Upanishads. So last month we had the Mother's Day, and this month we have the Father's Day, and next month we'll have the Guru Purnima. So in the Taittiriya Upanishad, there is a passage, in one place it is said, Matri Devo Bhava, Pitru Devo Bhava, Acharya Devo Bhava, Atithi Devo Bhava. And it goes exactly in the same order. That see the divine in your mother, see the divine in your father, see the divine in your teacher. And Atithi Devo Bhava, see the divine in any unexpected guest that arrives at home. So we just don't have a guest's day. Probably eventually it might come sometime in the month of August. But it's a wonderful idea to try to see the divine in the people who are immediately around us. And for most of us, at least in the early stage of our life, that is our parents. And then, of course, to see the divine in the people who are the trusted figures in our lives, people from whom we have received guidance and help. And then also then to see the divine in every guest that arrives at home. Now, although these specifics are mentioned, the ultimate message is that see the divine in all. The same Upanishad says, Tat Srishtva Tadeva Anupravishad, which means having projected this universe, God entered into every tiny bit of it. In other words, everything and everyone that we see in the world is nothing or no one other than God, since God has entered into every particle of this universe. Now this leads to some conclusions we may never have thought about it that way, or at least not as often. And that is, if every little particle in this universe is just filled with the presence of God, then we are seeing God everywhere all the time. Just not recognizing everyone and everything as God. And that is why the example that is often given in Vedanta texts about a rope that is mistaken for a snake in a partially lit room becomes suddenly very real, because even when we are mistaking a rope for a snake, even at that time we are still seeing the rope. We are not seeing the rope as rope, we are seeing the rope as snake. In exactly the same way, right at this very moment, I should be seeing everything before me as filled with divine, and so should every one of us. Now, we are not seeing everything as divine because just as the snake covered the rope, the world covers the divine. So there is another one Upanishad called the Isha Upanishad. It's one of the oldest Upanishads, which begins by saying, Isha vasyam idam sarvam yatkincha jagatyam jagat. And it's often, if you translate it literally, it does mean that cover the entire universe with God. And the idea is, see everything as filled with divine. But if you take it literally, cover everything with God, then that won't be right. What Vedanta says is that what we see is already covered. So you're not like adding a second cover over the first cover. So there is the cover of the world, and we are not expected to put a layer of God over it. What is actually meant is just the opposite. Not cover everything with God, but actually uncover the world. Remove the cover of the world, and you will find God already there. And that's the fascinating insight, that since God alone exists, we are in touch with God, we are in contact with God all the time. In that sense, sometimes when we say, oh, I want to have a vision of God, I want to see God, well, we are already seeing God. That's the reality. The only problem is, we are not seeing God as God. We are seeing God as the world. And what non-duality means is that God and the world are not two separate entities. It's not as if, oh, I have to ignore the world in order to go and see God. It doesn't work that way. We just have to see, and see clearly, see deeply, and then we see, if we look the way we should be able to look, when we become what is called sukshmadarshi, we cultivate that clarity of perception, then when we look at the world, ideally we should see God. That is the goal towards which all of our spiritual practices are expected to take us. That is why it is sometimes said, if you look at a tree and you see a tree, you haven't seen anything. But if you look at a tree and you see there a miracle of God, then you have seen the truth. Now, the implication of this insight is that every person we meet, every person we speak with, every person we look at is God. We know that when we go to a temple or a place of any place of worship, when we stand before the altar, we feel different. When we believe in God, we have faith in God, we stand before the altar of the divine, there's a certain way we look at what is on the altar. There is a certain presence we bring. Our being responds to the divine in a very special way. But then we come out of the temple and then we meet other people, then we look at them differently. And the implication really is the kind of feeling I have when I'm inside a temple and looking at the divine on the altar, and then I come out of the temple and meet other people, members of my family, my friends, or even just total strangers on the street, when I bring that same response to everyone, then I have become an enlightened being. That is what non-duality means. That where we see the divine and where we see something else, these two things are not different. The difference is in our heads, the difference is in our mind. The difference is not outside. And that is what non-duality is. And that's the idea that we are looking at presently. One of the themes that is discussed in the chapter is what is knowledge. And knowledge, jnanam, knowledge is recognizing the truth as it is, seeing things as they are. And last week we saw a set of qualities we need to cultivate in our own lives in order to cultivate that kind of perception, in order to get that kind of knowledge. So I will read that verse once again, which we studied last time, and then we will take up a fresh verse today. So verse 7. Amanitvam adambhitvam ahimsa kshantirarjavam acharyopasanam shaucham stairyam atma vinigraha. Humility, unpretentiousness, non-injury, forbearance, uprightness, service to the teacher, purity, steadiness, self-control. These are the things we saw last week. So let us look at verse number 8 today. Indriyartheshu vairagyam anahankara evacha janma mrityu jara vyadhi dukkha doshanudarshanam. The renunciation of sense objects and also absence of egoism, reflection on the evils of birth, death, old age, sickness, and pain. Again, the kind of qualities we need to develop in order to acquire knowledge. Now, acquisition of knowledge might seem as if getting something that we don't have. But actually, that's also not how the Gita sees it. Just as seeing God doesn't mean seeing God where God is not, but seeing God where God is, but God is covered, so we are just uncovering the reality. In the same way, getting knowledge does not mean that I am getting something that I don't have. Right now, at this very moment, we have all the knowledge that we need. But just as if our knowledge is covered, just as if the rope is covered and we see a snake in its place, we wouldn't know that it is a rope. Exactly in the same way, at present, our knowledge is covered. And what is covering our knowledge is ignorance. And we just have to remove that layer of ignorance, and knowledge which is already there will manifest on its own. Now here a philosophical question can be asked. Is it possible for knowledge to be covered by ignorance? And the answer is no. Knowledge is often seen as light. That's why we oftentimes, even in literature, it's the light of knowledge. And ignorance is often depicted as darkness. So what we are really saying here is that light is covered by darkness. And the question is it possible for light to be covered by darkness? Now, we can go on reflecting a lot over this. I mean, what is darkness for that matter? What is ignorance? Is ignorance merely absence of knowledge? Or is ignorance the presence of something? Because absence of something cannot cover anything. I mean, here, suppose suppose, just imagine, this is knowledge. Now, this knowledge is existing. Now, if this has to be covered, it has to be covered by something that is existing. It cannot be covered by non-existence. So, ignorance is not simply here absence of knowledge. And therefore, darkness, although light and darkness are mutually opposite, they cannot coexist. And so, the way ignorance is understood is not in the sense of something just absent, but some mysterious entity being also present. I say mysterious because it's difficult to say whether that is or is not. That's why it's mysterious. Again, going back to the rope and snake, because that's something a little bit easier to deal with than just this abstract is or is not. When we mistake a rope for a snake, we just see a snake where a rope is. Does the snake exist? So the snake is actually covering the rope. Because the snake is there, I'm not able to see the rope. But does the snake exist? Now, the answer is no. The snake doesn't exist. Because when you switch on the light, you don't see the snake. You can search the whole room, search the entire area. There is no snake. So the answer is snake doesn't exist. But then the problem is, how am I seeing something that doesn't exist? If I'm seeing a snake, something is there, right? So you cannot really say a snake doesn't exist because I'm seeing it. Now, I'm not like seeing snakes everywhere. I'm just seeing a snake there. So something is there because there is an absence of, for instance now, here it's, just imagine that this is a partially lit room. There is a coiled rope here and I have mistaken it for a snake. So I'm seeing the snake there, right? Now, it's not simply the absence of knowledge of the rope because there is no rope here. And I'm not seeing the snake here either. So, it's difficult to say whether the snake is or is not. I cannot say the snake is because ultimately it's found that it's never there. I cannot say the snake is not because I'm seeing it. I cannot say the snake exists and doesn't exist at the same time. That's impossible. So you kind of try all these different possibilities and then you say the status of the snake is it is inexpressible. You cannot say it is, you cannot say it is not. The world that we see belongs to that same category like the snake. Our human identity that we presently experience belongs to the same status. We cannot say we are not human because that's what we are experiencing right now. But we cannot say we are human because ultimately when the inner light is switched on, this human identity will completely disappear the way a snake disappears when the light is switched on. So that's why it's considered a mysterious entity. So knowledge is not really covered by ignorance, but it's also covered by ignorance. And we have to kind of use this kind of a Zen-like statement, if you like, because things that are impossible become possible only if they are not real. Because if something is not possible, it's not possible. But it seems as if it is possible. The word seems is the key word here. That means it's not really possible, it just appears to be so. So, let's go back. So, knowledge that we are seeking is not because we don't have knowledge now, but our knowledge is covered by ignorance. So, if these are the kind of qualities we try to cultivate in our life, we will be able to, I know this is going to sound odd, we're going to remove the ignorance that doesn't exist. Okay. Indriyartheshu vairagyam. Indriya are the senses. Artha means the object of the senses. Now, essentially, the senses are five. The senses of knowledge are five. The ability to see, the ability to hear, the ability to taste, the ability to touch, and the ability to smell. Now, all of these five abilities that we have each of them has an object. My ability to hear has sound as its object, and so on. So the world that we see is essentially made up of these five sensations. There is touch, there is sound, there is smell, there is sight, and what else is remaining? Sound, sight, taste. Smell, fragrance, I think. Anyway, you get the idea. So that's the world that we see. Now, there may be a lot in the world, and there is, but we are not really even seeing this world that doesn't exist. Even that world which doesn't exist, we are not seeing in its entirety. For instance, there is electricity, magnetism. There are so many things that are there. We don't see it. We don't feel it because none of our senses, so far at least, are able to perceive magnetism or electricity or all these other forces. Fortunately, we have other equipments we can do that. So, certain gadgets might be able to see things that my senses can't. Also, even the things that my senses are able to see, they are not able to see a whole range of those things. For instance, even sound. Now, there is a whole range of frequencies, even in sound. But my particular instrument that I have can only have this one segment. A certain frequencies it can hear, a certain frequency of light it can see, and so on. And therefore, even the objects of our senses that are available to us, we can only see a part of it. So even if all of our senses are in perfect working condition, we are not even seeing the material world as it is. Yes, with the help of some instruments and gadgets, with some telescopes and microscopes and all these other scopes that we have, we may be able to get a little bit more information about the world. And so all these gadgets are great because they are revealing to us the things that my senses don't reveal. And we know not all living creatures have the same range in their senses. They say a dog's sense of smell is several thousand times more than a human being's. And then cats can see in the dark, and at least these are the things any layperson has heard. And I'm sure there are a lot of differences, and specialists in the field might be able to enlighten us more about how the range of perceptions in different creatures varies. So what is said here is renunciation of sense objects. So now I've explained what the sense objects are. So first of all, we have to acknowledge the fact that whatever world that we are able to see is very limited. If we have a few instruments with us, we might be able to see a little bit more with the help of those instruments. Now, why should there be renunciation? What does renunciation mean? Indriyarthreshu vairagyam. The word renunciation here actually is really non-attachment. Because raga means an attachment, clinging. When you have vi as a prefix before raga, so viraga and its noun form become vairagya. That means that quality or that person from whom this raga has left, this clinging has gone away, this attachment has gone away. So why should we not cling to the objects of our senses? And a simple answer to that question is, it's a futile exercise. You see, if you want to cling to something, and if you can hold it, it makes a little bit of sense. Well, at least you can hold it. But no objects of the senses we are really able to hold. The things that I see, let's say the objects of my sense of perception, I'm able to see now everything that is in front of me. I cannot hold on to it because I close my eyes, those things go. They're gone. When I go to sleep, they are gone. When I fall unconscious, they are gone. And when I die, they are gone. So, even if I want to hold on to them, some of the things I might be able to hold on for a few seconds, a few minutes, but ultimately, there is nothing in this world that I can hold on forever. And this is not some new great insight. It's something that we have heard often, that when we come into this world, we come empty hands. We don't come with anything. And when we go, we will go with empty hands. We cannot carry anything with us. We don't bring anything with us. So all the clinging that occurs is between this period between birth and death. And the tragedy is that we don't even know how long this span is. It could be short, it could be long, but still limited. Now, clinging, the problem with clinging is that if I hold on to something, I'm asserting my ownership of that thing. I'm asserting that this is mine. It's somehow I want to hold it. But because we are never, ever going to be able to hold everything forever, things are going to slip away. Things are going to go away. If things are going to go away, then I'm going to be sad. I want to hold on to something and it goes away. And there is already enough suffering in this world. So if we can find things in our own life that bring us pain and suffering, even if we are not immediately able to eliminate all pain and all suffering from our life, the best thing we can do is to begin by asking, what are the kind of things that bring pain? What are the kind of things that bring suffering? And what Krishna is saying here is, my clinging, my futile effort to hold things, that is the primal cause of suffering. And so, don't cling, don't hold. That is what indriyartheshu vairagyam means. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't get to interact with things, of course. If I have a beautiful flower in front of me, I cannot hold on to that flower eternally, but I can enjoy its fragrance, I can enjoy its beauty, I can be happy looking at this a flower which is alive, and if you have a little a poetic imagination, if you see a full-blown rose or a hibiscus flower or any beautiful flower, and you look at it, and maybe with the eyes of a poet, you might see that the flower is smiling at you. And if the flower is smiling, and you see it beautiful when you actually go into the garden and you see with the breeze, these plants are swaying. It's not very difficult if you've got a little bit of imagination to see that every tree, every plant, every flower, every leaf, when it's smiling at you. And if you're able to see that smile, you can smile back at that. You're not going to be able to hold any of these things permanently, but that doesn't prevent you from communicating with them, from enjoying them, from smiling with them. And that's true with regard to even people around us. We are not going to be able to hold the people around us all the time. In fact, all coming together in life is ultimately for going apart. That's just how life is. We would, given a choice, maybe we wouldn't want that thing to occur, but really it's not in our hands. This is something that's just the way things are. Things come together and eventually separate. Same thing is true with regard to our body. How has the body been constituted? It's particles of matter that have come together. So the body is composed of material particles. It's a composition. But the same composition, when the body dies, leads to decomposition. So particles come together and compose this body. At some point, this composition is going to go apart. It's going to decompose. And that's true with regard to material things and with regard to everything in this world. And that is why clinging, trying to appropriate things, is not the best idea. And that is what knowledge means. Knowledge means recognizing that things are, making the best use of them, learning from them, growing with them, but not putting your stamp of ownership on anything. Nobody owns anything. Nobody owns no one. It's a delusion to think, I own this, or this person is mine, or this object is mine. Now, this can be tough, clearly, obviously, because we have people in our life we see as our own. We have things that we see as our own. And it might seem as if, if they are not my own, then I'm just left by myself. Actually, that's not true. That's precisely the point. That recognizing that they are not my own, recognizing that they don't belong to me, doesn't prevent me from being with them and their being with me. It doesn't prevent them from us learning from each other. It doesn't prevent us from all the interaction that we have in life. So all that we need to eliminate is just this sense of ownership. And that is what detachment from objects of senses means here. Next, anahankaraha, absence of egoism. You can see how all of these things are connected. From where does ownership come? When do I say something is mine? The idea of mine cannot exist without the idea of I. So aham, I, mama, mine. That is why you will see in Sri Ramakrishna's conversations, again and again he says, I and mine. that is bondage, that is ignorance. So if the first phrase asked us to look deeply upon our notion of ownership, notion of what is mine, Anahankara says, what is I? Who is this I? From where does this sense of I come? And on several occasions we have seen how our sense of I is very slippery. Sometimes we refer to the body as I. For instance, now when I say, I'm sitting here, I am holding the book. Really, who is holding the book? It's this, this body that's sitting here and the body is holding the book. But I just say, I am sitting, I am holding the book. So I'm really referring to the body as I. But then there are occasions when I can say, well, I'm holding the book in my hand. Now, the hand is a part of the body. So sometimes as a part of the body, I'm referring to it as just I. Or like if I'm hurt, I say, I'm hurt. Or sometimes I can say, my hand is aching. So it's very slippery. And we do it effortlessly throughout the day. Sometimes we refer to this as I. Sometimes we refer to this as mine. Same thing with regard to our emotions and feelings. Sometimes I say, oh, I'm happy. Or I'm miserable. Really, these are states of the mind. Or sometimes I say, oh, my mind is feeling great today. So again, my mind I sometimes refer to as just I, sometimes as mine. So if we just kind of, I know this is tedious, but even say for a short time, if you just remain a little bit alert, you will see how easily we just go back and forth between who is me and what is mine. Now this happens mostly with regard to our body, mind and everything. But those things and those people, of course, we don't see as me, they all become mine. So whatever is not I, but everything else over which I have some control, some influence, I try to spread my tentacles and say, these are mine. So these two things that are mentioned here, that give up the idea of I and mine. If someone can just live in this world free from the notion of I, which is limited to the body and mind, and mine, that person can be happy right now, this very moment. And we know that there are moments in our life when we do experience that state. It's not like we have never experienced it. Sometimes if you really had a good sleep, which is pretty rare these days, but just imagine if you had a really peaceful sleep. You have not been woken up by some alarm clock or something, that you just wake up naturally. There is no deadline waiting for you. There's nothing to be done. So you had a peaceful sleep. At least try to imagine it, even if you have never experienced it. But I think most of us have experienced it sometime or the other. I hope so. So you just wake up. And at that moment, at least the first few moments, when you wake up after a peaceful sleep, without any urgent work to attend to, you are actually free from a sense of I and mine. You're not thinking like, oh, I am sitting here, etc. The moment you begin to think, oh, I had a great sleep, then your I has come again. But sometimes when you just wake up, and for the first few moments, you just are. You're just there. There is no idea of I. There is no idea of mine. Unfortunately, that amazing state doesn't last for too long. Because then quickly we remember, oh, I've got to finish this. I've got to do that. and so on. And then this I and mind come and hold on to us again. This I and mind exists even in dream. It could be a different I and a different me, mind, but yes, because a dream is just kind of a recreation, well, not recreation, recreation of the world that we experience. So in a dream also, there is me and there are mine. The only state, and that which all of us experience every day, is the deep sleep state. There is no I. Well, I hesitate to say there is no I, but at least there is no I in the sense that we experience it now. Because there is nothing else. There is no world in deep sleep. So the I, which is there in a very seed form, is there, but it's like almost in a coma, if you but it's there. I say that because when we wake up in the morning, and if you had a good sleep, you do feel, oh, I really slept well. I didn't know anything. So there was a little bit of I there to experience that you didn't know anything in that deep sleep. There was a little bit of I there to experience that peace that was there. But it's in a very subtle form. So sleep itself is considered a vritti in yoga. It's called a vritti. Sometimes a helpful way to think of vritti is in a form of a wave, a thought wave. So just like when you drop a pebble in a still water, you'll find ripples everywhere, and that disturbs that water. And there is no disturbance, the water is still again. So that's our mind is sometimes pictured like that. It's a lake. And every thought that enters into the mind, every impulse, every wish, every desire, every hope, every fear, all of these things are creating ripples in the mind. And when we say the mind is disturbed, of course it's disturbed, because there are lots of pebbles falling in this water. The best chance we have, the best hope we have, is in the state of meditation. Because that's the time, what we are really trying to do is to make sure that as few pebbles fall into this water as possible. That's why we try to say, don't think of the past or the future. Don't think of your commitments in the world. Don't think about your plans and projects, at least for those few minutes that you are trying to meditate. So what we are trying to do is this water of the mind, the lake of the mind, if you like, which is so disturbed, we're trying to still it. When it becomes perfectly still, that is the time, or that is the day, that is the occasion you feel, I've had a good meditation. That is the time you're able to visualize your Ishta clearly in the heart. It's like this: if you just have a tub filled with water and just place a photograph, just dip a photograph in that water and let it be at the bottom of the tub. And if your water is all disturbed, you're not going to see that picture clearly, obviously. But if the water is still, you can see. Yes, it is still immersed in water, but you are able to see the picture clearly. So similarly, when we try to meditate in the heart, that water in the mind, which is disturbed by every little desire, every little thought, every little plan, every fear, when all those things, when we succeed in eliminating them, quieting them, even if for a short time, then we have a better chance of actually seeing the divine. So when we don't see the divine, it's not because the divine is not there, but because the water of the mind is disturbed. I need to still that water. And that's the very beginning of Yoga Sutras. That is exactly how yoga is defined. Yoga, chitta vritti nirodha. Remember, see the word vritti. Chitta is the mind. the vritti, the waves in the mind, nirodha, controlling them, stilling them, silencing them. That is yoga. And there the word yoga is used in the sense of concentration. So every concentration, every time we concentrate something, we are stilling the mind. Now, it's not just at the time of meditation. When you are engaged in some very important activity, or when you are reading some book, or you are doing something in which you are fully concentrated, that time you cannot say that there are no waves, but there is just one wave. If you are studying some subject or looking at an object through a microscope, if that is the only wave in your mind of that object that your eyes are seeing, you will see it more clearly. So it's possible to think about our japa and meditation in the same way. That it's not that there are complete absence of waves in the mind, but what we are really doing at the time of meditation is consciously creating only one wave. The wave which corresponds to the form of our Ishta, the form of our chosen deity, the form of the object of our meditation. Just one wave which corresponds to the sound of the mantra. And when we try to ignore or keep away all other thoughts, all other forms, all other sounds, what we are doing is the waves created by those forms, those sounds, are getting quieter and quieter and quieter. So just only one wave, the wave of your Ishta, remains. When that happens, you are able to see that Ishta clearly. And when even that wave subsides, then you go to the heart of it. That is what nirvikalpa means. So vikalpa is a difference. So wave is still different. It has a kind of an identity which is separate from the rest of the water. So there is a little bit of vikalpa there. But even when that wave subsides, then from form you go to formlessness. From sound you go to beyond sound. So when we do japa, we are taking help of the sound. When we are visualizing the form of our Ishta, we are taking the help of a form. But a divine form and a divine sacred sound of the mantra has this power embedded in it, that form takes us effortlessly to beyond form. The sound of the mantra takes us to beyond sound. Now that power is not there in worldly forms. You think of a worldly form, it actually multiplies into 10 other forms. You look at an object, you look at a person, you're looking at one form, but then all the associated forms and ideas with that person will create more ripples. It's only this sacred sound and the divine form. In that sense, it is special, it's different. Because rather than multiplying into more forms and multiplying into different sounds, it actually takes us beyond sound and beyond form. So, two very important qualities to be developed that this verse points us to: the absence of I and the absence of mine. That I should stop clinging to whatever I encounter and whoever I encounter in life. Learn from everyone, be with everyone, become better as human beings, grow, evolve, help one another, but don't put this stamp of ownership. It's a little bit like in these old farms and ranches. So all they have like hundreds and thousands of cattle. And if there are like several ranches in that area, then how would you know which is mine and which is someone else's? And so they used to brand this cattle. They'll have this a stamp put on it. So looking at that stamp, you know, oh, this belongs to me. That cattle belongs to my neighbor. That's what we are trying to do with things in our life. And what this verse says is, stop branding. Stop. No one belongs to nobody. But we can learn, we can grow, we can love one another without creating that sense of ownership. So we will stop here now, but try to reflect on this. If we can minimize the power of I and the power of mine in our daily life, we can begin to experience at least a little bit of freedom, a little bit of contentment, even before we have realized God. So yes, God realization will come, enlightenment will come. But don't think that until enlightenment, I just have to keep on suffering like this. No, I don't have to. I can begin to get at least a glimpse of what that peace means, what that contentment means. In however imperfect a way, if I try to examine the role of I and mine in my own life and try to learn to let go. Sri Ramakrishna says that when the sun is about to rise in the eastern direction, even before the sun has come above the horizon, you already begin to see the color of the eastern horizon change. Some beautiful, beautiful shades of orange, and it's great. That's what will happen. Even before we are become enlightened, if we are struggling sincerely in our practice, if we are taking these teachings of the Gita to heart and trying to practice it, as I said, we may fail 1,000,000 times, but without getting discouraged, we keep on practicing, we will see the horizon in our heart glowing. The sun has not risen yet, but yet we will begin to experience that little bit of peace, that little bit of contentment, that little bit of joy. And once you get just a slight taste of that, then you will become more greedy. So yes, greed is great, but greedy for this. If we can eliminate all other greed from our life and just be greedy, but in order for that greed to really take hold in our heart, we must first get a glimpse of that peace, that glimpse of that joy. And that is within our power to experience even before enlightenment. All that we need is perseverance, is that patience, and that kind of a dogged determination to say, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to try day after day after day after day. Okay. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. So we'll take a 5-minute break and then we'll meet again for any thoughts and ideas and questions. Let's look at the questions. how do we remain in touch with the real I, the Atman, which is beyond the senses? We cannot remain in touch with the real I as long as we are clinging to the false I. So that's what we discussed earlier today, that I have to let go of this false I for the real I to come in. I can't have both at the same time. Next. Sitting with our mind to do meditation is dry, confusing sometimes, while hearing you or reading Upanishad is so peacefully calming and logical. Can we evolve without meditation? One thing helpful to remember is that while sitting down in a particular posture might be often identified with what is called meditation, but that is not the only way to meditate. Meditation really means, in effect, being in the presence of God. Now that can be done ideally not only when you are sitting quietly, but when you are walking, when you are drinking tea, when you are reading. While that is theoretically possible, when we are engaged with certain things, when you are reading, when you are walking, when you are drinking tea, there are things that could distract us. And therefore, sitting in one place, not doing anything else at that same time, is a little bit easier to practice meditation. But it's not helpful to limit meditation as a practice only to that particular posture and that particular time. The goal is, or the idea is, if I can spend at least 10 or 15 minutes or whatever amount of time I'm able to give to sit quietly with my head, shoulder and hips in straight line, and just create this one thought wave, one vritti in the mind, and follow whatever instructions I may have received from my guru. And if I can do that in the morning and evening, for whatever amount of time it is possible for me to do so, then I stand a better chance of maintaining that awareness even then when I'm walking, when I'm eating, when I'm working. Now, that awareness will get dissipated a little bit because I'm engaged with meeting with people and things, but something of that feeling will get carried over even when I'm not sitting. So that is the goal. If my meditation is just when I'm sitting, and then when I wake up, I'm engaged with all my other non-spiritual things, then it's pointless. It's a little bit like, think about it this way. When we take a shot, say it's a flu shot or whatever shot, now that's given in one part of the body, right? Now, although the shot is given in just one part of the body, the whole body gets the benefit of that. It's not that if my COVID shot is given only one place here, only this part is protected. No, the whole body is protected. Similarly, if you look at the body of a day, it's a 24-hour body. And what we are really doing is giving a shot to this 24-hour body through our meditation. Now, the benefit of that one shot should benefit, that benefit should remain all through the 24 hours, not just the time when we are sitting. Now, that's the goal. We may not always succeed in doing so, but that's the purpose. And therefore, this question whether we can evolve without meditation, think about this question in the light of what I just said. That if by evolution you mean that I should feel the presence of God everywhere, outside and inside. If that is the goal, if that is what evolution means, and meditation also means feeling the presence of God. And so, if that's how we understand the terms evolution and meditation, then we have to say a meditation is necessary, although not just one fixed idea about what meditation is. Next, for practical reasons at work or at home, we must use the pronoun I. Language like that may condition my mind further toward building up the ego. What thought exercises should we do to remind us? I don't think we need to think about alternatives to the pronoun I or mine. I think they are fine. They can remain as they are. But just be aware of the fact. It's like this. It's like even when someone is staying in a rented home, as long as people are staying in that home, they don't always say, oh, in my landlord's place. No, they say, this is my home. It really doesn't belong to them. They're just paying rent. So they don't really own that place. But even when they say this is my home, somewhere deep down they know, not really my home. If I stop paying my rent, or if I go someplace else, someone else is going to come and stay in this home. So just as we do use I and mine in our daily life, while simultaneously being aware of the fact that this is not really mine, in the same way, we can continue to use the word I or mine, but somewhere in the corner of the heart be aware nothing is really mine. As long as you're working in a certain place, you can say it's my office, my work. The moment you change your job, that's no longer your office, no longer your work. So that my is very fluctuating, and that's great. But you don't have to stop using the word, just be aware of it, that's all. Next, often Leela Dhyana really helps, but is that just tricking the mind, or is it truly training the unruly mind? Does one get stuck at that, or can we ever move on to a state where no support is needed? So Leela Dhyana means reflecting on the incidents from the life of one's chosen deity. So instead of just sitting in one place, meditating on Krishna, for instance, one remains immersed in thinking about the different events, different incidents from Krishna's life. And it's definitely very helpful. Some people who find it difficult to visualize, or difficult to think, or difficult to hold their mind on simply a still presence of Krishna, might find it easier to just visualize Krishna running and playing, and that's great. And I think it's definitely helpful, because as I said earlier, if meditation means being in the presence of God, then it's not as if when you are meditating on Ramakrishna, not like Ramakrishna is always sitting in the posture we see in this well-known photograph of his. Ramakrishna did move about, he did go here and there, he did walk. So if we want to think of him sometimes in that moving Ramakrishna, I think that's fine, that's great. Or Holy Mother. So in Mother's pictures, most of the photographs that we have, the Mother's hair, as women in that part of the world often did, her hair is like just comes in front. Now it's not like that was always how Mother had it. Or Vivekananda's famous picture is with folded hand like that. Chicago, the photo taken at the Chicago Parliament of Religions. Now it's not like Swami Vivekananda was always like that. I remember in India, oftentimes when you have these children enact incidents from the life of Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, and Swamiji, and so they have these costumes, etc. But always it was kind of funny and kind of cute in some ways. Little children will come on the stage and Vivekananda will be always standing with folded hands. And the one who is doing the role of Holy Mother will always have her hair in front. And Ramakrishna, because there is that, remember that one posture of his standing in Samadhi like this? So Ramakrishna will be like always like this. Now, you can understand these are the things that have gotten associated with those personalities. But clearly, that's not how they always remained. So Leela Dhyana is fine. Again, in these instances, always follow whatever your guru has asked you to do. Because there is no one standard way of meditating, one universal way to do it. And so best is to follow the instructions of our teachers. Next, when a person in our lives has a challenge by which they are stressed, is it advisable in meditation to wish to create peace for that person? Or is this an example of attachment? No, praying for the peace of other people, in fact, is very helpful. It is good. That is a very important spiritual practice. I would call it more a prayer than a meditation. In fact, the first thing to do in most spiritual practices is begin with prayer. Pray for everyone, and that's the prayer that's included. We do it every Sunday during Satsang. Pray for the well-being of everyone in the world. In Buddha's teaching, Buddha said, send these currents of love and peace in the east, in the west, in the north, in the south, in all directions. And of course, pray especially for your family, for your friends, the people you know, especially those who you feel need your prayers. So I wouldn't call that an expression of attachment. In fact, that could be, in a way, an expression of detachment. Let me explain. People often think praying is for oneself. But that in some way is an attachment. Like, I want, God, give me this, give me this. But instead of that, if I begin my prayer by saying, Lord, God, please help this person who is in pain, who is suffering. So, to the extent I'm able to do that prayer with utter sincerity, I am getting detached from the needs and requirements of this little I here, because I am thinking of someone else before thinking of myself. I am putting the interest of someone else before my self-interest. So I wouldn't see that as attachment. In fact, I would see that it's a very helpful practice to not make everything all just about myself. Oh, why am I meditating? I want to be enlightened. Why am I praying? I want this. It's interesting. We have to be so careful. Even while apparently doing spiritual things, we might be bolstering our ego. It's all about me. It's all about I. So we have to be really careful. And therefore, praying and beginning the prayer by praying for everyone. Pray for those people you know, but also pray for people whom you may not know, people you may never meet in your life. There is so much suffering in life. So pray for everyone. And don't do it just as a form of a ritual. A prayer is not a ritual. A prayer is effective only if it comes from the heart. Only if I mean it. It's not some kind of a magic formula. So only if I feel utterly that this world is suffering. God, please give your grace upon all. And of course, the people who are near to me, people who I know, people who I know personally are suffering, praying for them is always a very, very, very important thing to do. Next, is clinging to a personal God also a form of attachment? No. Well, it is an attachment that will lead to detachment, so it's not a harmful attachment. I mean, if you want to be technical about it, yes, of course, I'm attaching to a personal God. But if my attaching myself to a personal God is simultaneously detaching me from everything else in this material world, I think that's a good attachment. So again, we shouldn't get hung up with just words. Oh, attachment bad. No. If I'm attached to God, that's great. Or like desire bad. No. If I desire God, if I desire to help, if I desire to be honest and truthful, that desire is good. So it's not just about the word desire or the word attachment. We must always ask the question, attachment to whom? Desire for what? That's what discernment, viveka, means. Next, are there words other than me or mine that we can begin to use to help us to move from our conventional way of thinking? I don't think that's necessary. It's not just the words. It's the feeling behind the words. So I can stop using I or mine and I can create some different word, but in that other word, if I still have the feeling of I and mine, then just changing the word doesn't change anything. And so therefore, I don't think it's necessary or it's even a good idea, because if you kind of change the word, if you stop saying I or mine, you might be deluded into thinking, oh, I no longer say I or mine, my I or mine is gone. No. Just because you don't use the word doesn't mean it's not there. So use the word. Don't be afraid of that word I or mine, but just have some kind of an inner alert to know who is this real I, whether anything is really mine. Just be aware of that. But you see, that's the problem with people who enter into spiritual life. The most important thing in spiritual life is live like a normal person. Because say, oh, attachment is bad, I or mine, I should not use the word I or mine, then you're going to appear very weird to people. People are going to say, what's wrong with this person? And then, not only are you not being benefited, you're going to make appear spirituality as something which is strange, something that will not make you like everybody else. And you're going to create a distaste in other people for spirituality. So don't do that. Yeah, that's it. In the earlier verses in this chapter, Chetana or consciousness is referred to as the field, Kshetra. Is this a different kind of consciousness and not the all-pervading consciousness? I don't know which verses are referred to. I would suggest that if you have a question of this type, you try to be a little bit more specific so that it will be easier for me then to refer to which verses you have in mind and the difference in meaning between the consciousness. The more specific you are, the easier it becomes then for me to understand what your difficulty is, and I'll try to answer it only if I know the answer, of course. Next, Swamiji, you mentioned Guru, how important is finding a Guru for spiritual progress in meditation. Would instruction via books or other media qualify? How would one find a Guru? That's a good question. It's a question that has no definitive answer. The books say that when the student is ready, the teacher arrives. Now that's a very general instructions we find in many books. The question is, what does it mean that when a student is ready, the teacher comes in our life? Would there be an automatically some knock on the door? Well, teacher says, I think you are ready, I have come. Well, no one can say that won't happen, but that may not be the only way to understand that thing. In fact, if we look at people who have had teachers in their life, who have received guidance in their life, people have different stories about how the teacher entered into their life. Sometimes it could be the student went in search of a teacher. Sometimes it could be a chance meeting. Sometimes it could, but there are really infinite possibilities. I think what is important here is when the student really feels the need for guidance, then that search for guidance can take different forms in the lives of different people. And therefore, the response that one gets in that search could also come in many different forms. So don't have some fixed ideas about how a teacher can be found, but keep on searching. And one of the things that every one of us can do is to be a little careful, be a little alert about whom we choose as a teacher. Because sometimes appearances can be deceptive. Sometimes people have come to grief in their life, imagining that someone is their teacher, and then later on discovering, oh no, this is not the kind of teacher that I was looking for. So there is no need to rush into it, but be on the lookout if someone is looking for a teacher. Have your own, it's like when you are choosing something, when you are wanting something, use your best judgment, your experience to make sure that the guidance you receive is from an authentic, dependable, trustworthy source. Yes, sometimes instructions come via books, but the problem with that is that there are really so many books. If you go to any bookshop, there'll be like 100 books on meditation. How would we even know which book or which method is ideal for us? Because as I said, there is no one universal method. And so that's the advantage in getting instructions from a teacher. A teacher may not always tell us something which is radically different from what is in the books. But what the books will give us is some clarity of understanding. It's mostly at the intellectual level. But what we get from a living source of knowledge, a living teacher, is actually connecting ourselves with the living tradition. So it's more than simply intellectual. It's really just like when we go to school and we learn from our teachers or professors. It's not, if the teacher or professor is simply going to tell us what's in the book, then what's the point? Why even go to a school? We can get the book and read it ourselves. But oftentimes we know that when we go to a school and learn from our teacher, we get certain insights, certain tips that may not always be available in books. A teacher is one who has digested whatever he or she has learned, has infused it with power by their own experience, and then pass it on to their students. So a teacher was also a student once, and who has learned from their teacher, So what gets passed from one generation to the next is this lamp of knowledge, the light that is passed from one generation to the next. And just as that can happen in the academic intellectual field, it can also happen, in fact it does happen in spiritual field as well. And therefore, it's best to get instructions not simply from books but from a teacher. But now, the times in which we live, and especially the last 15 months, it's not been very easy to go out in search of a teacher. So I would think that since we are using online instructions now, or online lectures, this itself is now online, So, well, we have found a way to still continue to learn and teach in other ways than in meeting directly in person. So it might be possible, therefore, to receive instruction from a teacher even via a Zoom or a video chat if there are other constraints in meeting personally. But I do think that a need for a teacher is emphasized in the Gita and the Upanishads as well. In fact, there is a saying in the Upanishad, in Sanskrit, it goes like this: Acharyat hi prapta vidya sadhishta prapishtha bhavati. That means a knowledge that is acquired, only the knowledge that is acquired from a teacher becomes like becomes fulfilling. So it's not simply knowledge from books. Having said that, one can never put limits in spiritual life. One can never say, oh, through books you can never get it. I would never say that. So there could be exceptions. Some people might find studying from books itself may be enough for their spiritual progress and enlightenment, but that would necessarily be an exception. Next, are both thoughts and feelings vrittis? Yes, they are both vrittis. They are both waves in the mind. All right, so we will stop here now, and thank you for your questions, and we will continue this study further when we meet next week. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto